Hello and welcome to the print and Snesh Alex Philip. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is undertaking a key visit to both Poland and Ukraine. Well, of course, this would be the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine. What is significant is that this is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Poland since 1979. Now, before 1979, of course, India had much better ties with Poland. You had visits undertaken by both Indira Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. But what really happened post that, and why is this visit so important? And for to carry forward this conversation, I have with me none other than the topmost expert when it comes to Poland, that is Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, who was our envoy not just in Poland, but also our envoy in Pakistan and Canada. Welcome to the print, Ambassador.
Thank you, Snehesh. Great to be here.
Thank you, sir. So before we go back into history, I want to know, why is this visit so important for India? Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland.
Well, for multiple reasons. This is a visit by an Indian Prime Minister to a war zone. So I don't recall a visit to a war zone by an Indian Prime Minister without any very good reason. And so this is, I think, important for that reason. It is also important because it signifies a certain attempt by India to increase its footprint in Central Europe, where we haven't had too much engagement at the high political level. You would recall that when Modi went to Russia the last month, he also made a trip to Austria, which was again after 4 decades, after 41 years. So this is another visit to a country in which no Indian Prime Minister had been for 45 years. And I think often by itself, it's important for that reason. It's always good to visit these relationships and upgrade them and talk about them. But more than that, at this point, it's a visit at a time of war. And I think that is, again, a new for Indian diplomacy and a new experiment, I would say. And I just hope that it would be a successful one.
Interesting that you mention it, because if I recollect, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to undertake a train journey from Warsaw into Kiev. Now, no SPG protected Prime Minister in India has ever undertaken a train journey, right? And because if you're in a car, if you're in an aircraft, there are multiple escape plans that are in place. But in terms of a train journey, this, I'm sure, it involved a huge security planning per se. But you mentioned that since 1971, no one has really visited. But before 1979, there was a very close relationship between India and Poland, right? But what happened after 1979?
Well, that was a different Poland. The world, one of the things that has changed, certainly Poland has changed, but the world has changed. Because all those visits by Nehru in 55, by Indira Gandhi in 1967, by Morarji Desai in 1979 were to a Soviet satellite state, which was part of the Comecon, the economic arrangement of the Eastern Bloc. It was part of the Warsaw Pact, which was the security arrangement of the Eastern Bloc. So those were goodwill visits to the satellite states of the Soviet Union, with whom we used to have annual protocols of barter trade. And so it was a different world altogether. And since then, in the 80s, Poland started to change with the Solidarity movement, and with the collapse of communism, Poland became a sort of independent democratic Poland. And then soon in 99 joined NATO, in 2004 joined the European Union. And Poland has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the European project, because between 2004 and 24, the last 2 decades, It's pulled in about 250 billion euros of European support, and it's managed to enhance its infrastructure, its economy, to become a developed economy that is 80% of the EU average. So if you walk into Warsaw today, it'll remind you more of Berlin than of the old Moscow. So it's been a huge transformation, and therefore this transformed relationship, country calls for a transformed relationship as well. And it was high time that India upgraded this relationship by a visit at the high political level.
See, many would probably see this visit to Poland as a necessity because you had to undertake a visit to Ukraine. But in a way, Poland it's part of the European Union, but it's not necessarily in unison with the policies of the European Union per se. And next year, it's going to take over the chair of the EU. If you could, shed some light on this particular aspect for our viewers, sir.
Yes, and I think Poland is at a very interesting stage. It's had a change in government. In October last year, new government took over, which is a more liberal government under Donald Tusk, who used to himself be the European Commission chair and European Council chair. And we now have a situation where Poland is an important member in any case of Central Europe, or what we call the New Europe. But it also will be the EU chair for all Europe in the rotating presidency. So I think the new government in Poland is more in sync with Brussels than the previous government was. And therefore, we should see this as a visit to an important European country. We tend to be focused in Europe on the 3 or 4 major countries, Germany, France, the UK, and Italy. But it's good that we are focusing on the new Europe, which in many ways brings a new dynamism to Europe. And certainly in a security sense, it is the eastward edge of NATO's expansion. And therefore, Poland becomes an important sort of strategic location, which guides Europe in multiple ways.
Well, Poland has actually gone ahead and surprised the NATO in terms of its defense expenditure, right? It has actually gone ahead and committed to spend more than what NATO wanted other Europe, its members to do, like Germany to do. So do you think that there is a scope for cooperation between India and Poland in the defense sector, because Poland now is setting up a huge manufacturing base? It is buying in multiple systems, including the K9s from South Korea, which India is also operating. Do you foresee a kind of a defense security cooperation between India and Poland?
Yes, and that conversation took place in Prime Minister Modi's conversation with Donald Tusk. We've opened a defense wing in Warsaw very recently, or reopened it. We used to have one in the past.
In April this year.
Yes. And what happens is that Poland combines the sturdiness of the former Soviet equipment with the newer European or NATO models of defense platforms. And that, in a sense, is also what India has, a mix of Soviet equipment and modern Western equipment. And therefore, there are some synergies, but it's early days to talk about large-scale defense cooperation. But certainly, there will be several niche areas in which there could be cooperation in some innovative defense areas.
So, while of course, Poland visit is crucial, we cannot ignore the fact that this visit is not a standalone visit, and it largely came more because, the Prime Minister was going to visit Ukraine, and we can't get to Ukraine without Poland. In terms of Ukraine, what do you think Prime Minister's main objective in Ukraine would be? And I'll ask you a question that everybody is asking on Twitter and social media and otherwise, is that can India be a peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think the objective of the visits are multiple, and there are always multiple drivers, and you can't talk of one factor. People were talking of it as a geopolitical balancing act to appease the West after the visit to Russia. It is possibly some of that, certainly. It is a balancing, but it goes beyond. And I've argued that it a visit at this time to Ukraine gives India more diplomatic space for its strategic autonomy and multi-vector engagement, with both sides of this conflict. It also, I think, given the risk of conflagration, of escalating war, it's a way for India to mitigate the risk to its own growth story. Because if you have a major third world war in Europe, it affects you, it affects your energy, your food, and your health security in multiple ways. Apart from that, India just had a Global South summit, so it strengthens India's leadership of the Global South, conveys a message to the richer world that the poorer nations suffer in these wars of the rich, and therefore, it makes a point there. It burnishes India's reputation as a rising and benign global power, as against, for instance, a belligerent China, which plays this game differently. So,
Yeah.
in fact, I have argued that perhaps. Modi talked about a global development compact recently, so it's perhaps time to talk of a global peace compact with the world, where the growth of the developing world is protected by ensuring that the risks of conflict are reduced.
That's an interesting point that you mentioned. But do you think that, I'll again ask the same question, but do you think that India can really become, uh, a country that can bring these two warring nations to the negotiating table? Like how, for example, you have a China peace plan, you have a Russia peace plan, you have a Ukraine peace plan, which is backed by the US. But is there a peace plan that India can really work about, sir?
you know I think the way to look at it is that the business of peacemaking is also multi-layered and multi-splendored, right? You can operate at the lower rungs of it, because when Modi calls Zelensky, when he calls Putin, when he calls Macron or Biden on the phone, that is also an attempt at peacemaking, because he is talking to the warring parties and asking them to get to dialogue and diplomacy. When he meets them in their own home, that is also peacemaking. So you're talking of escalating this to a higher levels of peacemaking, which is negotiating a ceasefire or a peace plan. I don't think that moment has come now. For India, India is the one country that both these leaders are willing to sort of halfway trust, to be a neutral party, and in a sense willing to listen to. But whether we go armed with a peace plan, I don't think Modi is going armed with any peace plan. He's only going with a suggestion and a friendly advice that, can you solve this problem on the negotiating table, talk to each other, rather than attempt do it on the battlefield. And for that, India has multiple options and can go as far as the two belligerents will want it to. Which means, if they say, okay, fine, we are willing to talk, can we send teams to India? We could, for instance, be willing to provide that platform. So we need not necessarily have a Camp David kind of model where we put people in the room and give advice on how to make that peace. At the moment, I think all India is saying is, please talk to each other, please stop fighting.
Well, that's an interesting point that you've made, is that while India may not necessarily have a peace plan in place, India does not intend to have a peace plan in place, but the message of peace is what Prime Minister Modi is carrying. But thanks a lot, ambassadors, for speaking to the print. It's a pleasure to have you on board, sir.
Great. Thank you, Snehesh. Great to chat with you.